Hey there, and welcome back to the Sim Racing channel where we'll try anything at least once. RaceRoom is one of those sims that always flew by under the radar for me. With all the wealth of great sim racing content out there, it always seemed difficult to motivate myself to try a sim built on a fairly dated graphics engine using a strange, somewhat convoluted in-house currency scheme with hit or miss physics and a very small, even by sim racer standards, active player count. RaceRoom was always championed by a small subsect of the community as being the racing sim for audiophiles, which naturally piqued my interest as a lifelong sound engineer. That said, with the release of Dirt Rally and Assetto Corsa Competizione and their respective industry-leading sound engines, even that advantage fell by the wayside, and I ultimately never gave RaceRoom the time of day. That is, until now. Earlier this week, I drove RaceRoom for the first time ever. The motivation? Everybody talking about this supposedly revolutionary new change to the force feedback engine, which was slated to arrive later this month. Rather than arrive here as a complete newcomer, I felt it good to at least get a rough grasp of where RaceRoom was coming from before experiencing its new form. What I found was promising, albeit rough. Certain things about the sim I really enjoyed, such as the ability to assign alternate shifters for jumping between paddles and a sequential shifter stick very quickly, all the while maintaining H-pattern compatibility for jumping into cars from yesteryear. Additionally, I really enjoyed their inclusion of some less than common tracks such as Sonoma Raceway. The car setup screen and setup management I found to be relievingly intuitive, and though the UI had a tinge of the 90s and early 2000s about it, I actually found this somewhat comforting because I'm an old man and I prefer well-structured UI compared to the complete sensory overload which many UX designers are favoring these days. Coming from years of driving R-Factor 2, the UI experience as well as the engrossing sound engine were very welcome. This, however, started falling apart when I reached the force feedback settings. RaceRoom was littered with a myriad of obtuse settings to dial in an assortment of canned forces, which immediately shook my confidence. After arming myself with a starting point by trawling various YouTube setup tutorials, I decided to give it a shot. While the force feedback engine ended up being serviceable and strangely communicative whenever it needed to be, it felt quite unlike anything I've experienced in the real world and created a sort of disconnect between myself and the car. The driving itself was actually fairly serviceable. I had some good races in cars that felt reasonably predictable, and I understood why some people would enjoy going back to that. After trying a collection of the free content, as well as demoing assorted DLC cars in their test track, I decided to leave RaceRoom to the side, fairly confident in the knowledge that it was never going to be the right sim for me, and that I did alright by having dodged it for all these years. However, just yesterday saw the release of their brand new force feedback update. One which assures us it solely uses physical forces from the engine itself, minimizes the use of canned effects, and will create a far grander sense of immersion with the driving experience. Armed with a press copy of RaceRoom, we're going to delve into some of the premium content and get a better idea of where this sim with very old roots finds itself in 2021. But first, let's go over the new changes to the field of view and force feedback menus. Let's check out these eagerly anticipated new menu options. We'll begin with the field of view. The field of view begins deceptively simple. The basic field of view adjusted just like any other sim racing title, except with a handy little picture on the left showing you what that actually means. However, if you want to get a little bit more scientific with this, you absolutely can. This is deceptively powerful. The moment you check Advanced FOV, a slew of new options opens up underneath, which are immensely powerful and save you needing to use an external FOV calculator. So the first setting you get is whether or not you're running triple screens. The next one is the screen size. Then there's the distance to your screen, as well as your head height offset in relation to said screen. Now sure, you can guesstimate and put this in scientifically, but I find a much more fun way to do this is enter calibration mode. Suddenly, you're seeing the actual cockpit. So let's reset the seat position, right? This is the default setup. We go here. If I adjust my screen size, say I have a larger 75-inch TV, we can of course fit more detail on there, so the FOV gets larger and larger and larger. I'm going to go back to the 55-inch TV that I use, and then there's the distance to the screen. So I'm just over a meter, so that's over there, and obviously the closer and closer we are to the screen, the more detail we can afford to fit in. In my case, going back to just over a meter, that seems pretty good for me. and the head height offset because I'm sitting lower. There we go, perfect. Looking down at the dash a little bit more, getting a bit more detail from the actual heads-up display there. And now, here is the really fun part. Click and drag to move seat. So simply left click here, move forward to go down and look at that gorgeous Porsche Stuttgart logo, and then drag it back down to just look over the hood in a way that you probably never would in a real-life GT car because your seating position is so low and centered, but we're seeing that beautiful Grello strip up the top there, so how can I say no to that? Now, if you hold your mouse button and move the mouse left and right, that of course moves the seat forward and back. I think I want to move just the tiniest bit forward. I want to get rid of that pillar on the left there, because it's not really helping us much at all. We can see more to the sides, more to the apexes there, so I normally like looking at it as close to the dash as possible. Probably a little bit too much. I'd say I'm being a little bit too aggressive here. But there, that's about it for me. Don't want to spend too much time here. But that's all it takes, guys, to get your FOV absolutely perfect in RaceRoom. This is industry leading, so deceptively simple, but so powerful. Two hands together, my props. So now we can move on to the most eagerly anticipated part of this entire update, the new force feedback engine, of course, driven entirely by the physical forces of the physics engine rather than a slew of canned effects which only kicked in when certain triggers were met during the driving experience. This has led to a massive reduction in the amount of options that you get for force feedback because they were quite simply just convoluted and most of them didn't really do much of anything in the old engine. So this is going to be absolutely amazing. Not to mention, look at how informative this is. Look at all of the data that you have. Look at all of the indications that you have of what you should be running depending on the wheel torque your wheelbase is capable of. This is what the sim racing scene has been needing. I cannot believe that it's taken until 2021 to get this into a sim racing title. So we'll work our way through. Make special note of this picture up in the top right as it will change depending on the settings and the sliders that I move around. So force feedback strength, fairly self-evident. I'll have a far more detailed video about setting up the force feedback and RaceRoom coming up as part of my FANATEC DD1 force feedback recommendations video, so stay tuned for that. Force feedback linearity, you can see it dragging up the lower end forces, compressing the signal more and more and more. Essentially, it acts as a signal compressor, if anybody is familiar with audio. Force feedback minimum force, a setting that most people in sim racing still don't know about. This is the one that can turn a low-end wheelbase into an absolute monster of detail. So whereas you might get absolutely nothing on straights, no grain, a completely dead middle here, moving it up to here or here, you suddenly get feel again. Now, the FFB maximum force is an interesting addition, to my knowledge relatively unique to RaceRoom, because you can actually artificially set a lower clipping point, thus diminishing your dynamic range and simply just chopping the peaks off. So if you can imagine you're driving down a long sustained turn, high load on the tires, high load on the wheel, and then you hit a jagged curb. That might shoot your force feedback way out and jostle your hands all over the place, making your shoulders go ouchie ouchie. And you may not want that to happen, so you can actually dial in artificial clipping if you so wish. Stationary friction is one that everybody knows. AC does a really good job of emulating this. This is of course the heavy damping force of the wheel when the car is stationary or moving at a very low speed. Anybody that's ever driven a road car, especially one that's hydraulic or not power steering assisted, will know exactly what this feels like. Below this, we have the immersion, aka canned effects. You can actually put in a set amount of engine vibrations into the wheel, which for me would not be canned at all because my road car actually has these through the steering column in real life. There's the bump amplification, known as the road effect or the road noise from the AC series, basically the same thing, just gives you a little bit more of those details. And then the gear shift effects, something we all love about RaceRoom. If you have a transducer, if you have a motion rig, if you have a butt kicker, this is something you want. You want to be kicked in the butt every single time you do a successful shift. You want to know it, you want to feel it. I'm going to dial it up just for my wheel, just because I love this sensation so much. Anyway, guys, that's the new force feedback engine. That's the new force feedback settings. I'm so excited. I actually want to feel this because I have actually driven the old one. I have a point of reference. So let's see how much of an improvement, if any, this has actually made. First ever time driving RaceRoom here on this channel, guys. I'm super excited. I only ever drove this title for the first time earlier this week. I was lucky enough to secure a press pass just to make sure that I got a good feel for the content, that we could be coming from the same reference points. When I talk to you guys about this force feedback engine, it can be coming from the same reference point that you know from having driven RaceRoom for years, obviously. So they've done out with all the canned forces, all the things not at all related to the physics engine, and now we have something completely tied into what's actually happening with the car. So I can't wait to try this out. We're of course here in the Manthey Racing Grello at the one and only 24 hours of Nürburgring. Obviously not doing 24 hours though, because there's no day-night cycle in RaceRoom. But on account of the video I did earlier tonight, or earlier last night, I mean, it really depends on when this video comes out, I've obviously got a reasonable amount of experience driving this car model on this track between a couple of different sims now. So of course, this had to be the opener, driving the one class of car that seems to be all that sim racers seem to want to drive these days, GT3s, at one of the most famous racetracks in the world, and of course my personal favorite. So we're in a field of 46 cars, of which I was last because I am too lazy to qualify. And we're going to see, with an AI strength of 100, how far up the grid we can get in one lap. All the while I try and carve out some space to talk to you guys about what the sensation of driving this car is actually like with the new force feedback. So, you know, immediately I feel like saying this, I don't even want to qualify it by saying it's subjective or just my opinion, but honestly the force feedback is just better. It's more lifelike, it's giving me the forces I would expect from a real car under these situations. There's none of this weird lightning of the force feedback when you lose grip at the front axle. That was really strange. Like when you were loaded up at high speed and you maxed out the slip angle of the tire, you could just keep turning. And I mean, sure, the car would understeer, but you could just keep turning. It was weird. Whereas now you kind of get that rustling, rumbling effect. Whoa, we have some really slow AI going on here. I don't know what's happening. Oh, no, 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 no. Okay, they're doing some very interesting things for us. As am I, apparently. Whoa, whoa. Getting nudged a bit there. Alright, here we go. So I've got to say, driving through this track a couple of times in RaceRoom, it feels kind of like the AC version of the track. But it drives so much better, because obviously RaceRoom's been advancing its physics model, whereas AC has kind of just been on hold in the background while Kuno's work on ACC. So it's a really surreal combination of elements. It's like that laser scan, that version that we all know and love, but with just a way more lifelike presentation of how to drive it. See, I can just get on the curbs, I can make it happen. I'm still not 100% confident, obviously, but way more than I would be in AC. The car just feels more planted, more grounded. The loading up of the damping at high speed that I'm feeling right now is so good on the DD1. You would love how little time I had to spend to dial in the force feedback to absolute perfection earlier. And not only that, I'm feeling the gear shifts bump me in the wheel whenever I do it. I'm almost tempted to get a butt kicker or motion rig so I can actually sense it myself. Whoa, 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 what these guys are doing is very interesting to me. The AI is quite interesting in RaceRoom. As with anything, advantages and disadvantages. As you can tell, RaceRoom, graphically, possibly one of the, if not the most outmoded sim on the market right now. It's up there with iRacing. But that aside, I like that they've kept the physics engine relatively current. It feels very nice to drive this. And though I wouldn't say I prefer driving the GT3 class in this to ACC, I feel like ACC has some special sauce going on from its very hyper-specialized developments. The sensation of grip loss, the progressive nature of grip loss, I feel like these guys do amazingly well. You can feel tire deformation, you can feel softening, you can feel progressive grip loss. So even though the traction control and ABS systems may not work as one would expect, or things such as that nature, the actual sensation of driving is actually quite pleasurably presented. And certainly having driven this track to no shortage of laps across various sims, this is coming up to a very close second for me, I think, to R-Factor. So when I want to reach for a Nordschleife experience, it's usually R-Factor 2. Not only because they, in my opinion, have the best rendering of the Nordschleife in sim racing, but because of the feel of the cars. You know, despite their shortfalls and the... Oh, come on, guys. And despite the things about the physics engine that we spoke about, it still creates a sense of engagement unlike anything else. But this... I mean, this is getting up there. But come on, no, nobody brakes there. What are you doing? So I'm learning very quickly that AI at 100 is not where I should be on the Nordschleife. I just wanted this to be, you know, the one very vanilla test for us. A 911, of course, Manthey Racing livery here at the Nordschleife. I mean, what combination of car and track is more sim racer than this? More automotive enthusiast than this? As I struggle to work out, do I have the massive cojones of Kevin Estre to, like, overtake on the outside on the grass? Maybe I do. Wow, I do. Okay, cool. Cool grass handling. I much prefer it to AMS2 personally. None of that crazy landmine effect. You can actually get on the grass and drive it as you would in real life. Oh, this is going to be a disaster in waiting, isn't it? I'm gonna let him have the inside there. I'm sure the carousel would have felt great had I been able to get in there. Now, because of a lack of a radar, I don't know if this game has something like that. I'm not able to tell if there are cars next to me. That mid-corner effect there, I love it. Lots of dirty air coming from in front of me, of course, which is why I'm losing so much traction. Whoa. Massive understeer whenever I get on the throttle, because rear engine, followed by massive oversteer due to the fact that I'm running low TC. But yeah, the lines through here are so good. They're so lifelike. You can just maintain a driving style that's so similar to what you know. Traffic being a little bit frustrating, even by N24 standards. Now, if they had time of day... Now, if they had time of day changes, I would definitely have done a 24 hours of Nürburgring here, because this game has so many classes of cars. We could load up some TCRs, some GT4s, get some lapping action going on. It'd be so good. You know, I've never driven the Nordschleife with this much traffic before. It's quite an experience. Some might say it's overbearing, but here we are. In sector... Oh my god. Wow, okay. Wow. Did not expect to see that. I think I may have dialed down the rear wing slightly too much. With the addition of the dirty air, it's just creating a bit of an experience for me here. As we find room to... I do like finding the space to overtake, though. This feels very much like what I was watching on the broadcast. Whoa, okay. But yeah, so... The force feedback, for me, straight up improvement. I know some people have had mixed opinions. Nothing mixed from me. For me, it's just straight up better. From what I know of cars, from what I know of driving cars, especially when they load up, I mean, this is just more of that. More of what you'd expect. Come on, roller. Give me that toe. Give me that sweet, sweet toe. Load me up like you loaded up Estre. How fast am I going? 275, not too bad. I kind of lost that toe immediately, didn't I? I just have no straight line. Okay, the way the toe works in this is kind of interesting. Just wasn't able to get the speed on the straight. As we get very close to concluding our one lap with the ubiquitous GT3 class. Considering I'm able to run 46 cars on a grid of a track this large at 4K, I'm pretty happy. I mean, this is pretty fun. This is pretty fun. If I didn't have R-Factor 2 in my life, I think this might actually be edging in as my primary Nordschleife experience. So, two hands together. RaceRoom, I think you've done a very solid update here. I mean, continue on in this direction and who knows what's possible. Obviously, the game is held back by a fairly antiquated graphics engine. I don't know how much they're going to be able to do about that, but the fact that they've revamped the physics, the thing that, let's be honest, the thing that we all care about the most, that's a great step in the right direction. So, let's move on to our second car and track combo. Alright, now we're at Monza in our high downforce leg of the test in the M4 DTM car, the upcoming BMW M4 DTM. No points for guessing why I'm trying out this car with this track. Just keep an eye out on the sim racing scene, or better yet, hit the subscribe button down below because you're going to find out in my next video, very specifically. So I'm quite excited. I've never really driven DTM spec cars prior to this title. I don't think I even realized that they had no assists, but the fact that they're super high downforce, super low assist, makes them a really great test bed to find out whether the force feedback engine is actually giving the driver everything they need to drive something like this. So let's see, T1, the ominous T1. We seem to have survived it. That is very impressive. I don't know if I lost my clutch there or what, but the power just completely disappeared through T1. No DRS, no push to pass quite yet. These newfangled terms still very nebulous to me. I'm very much an old school analog guy. To me, what you set is what you get. If you dial in high downforce, you're going to be dealing with high downforce. There's none of this dynamically changing the wing in real time. So I almost, whoa, chaos here on the grid. As I almost locked the front brakes. So having driven Monza very sparingly, because I really am just not a Monza kind of guy, having driven it very sparingly in ACC, I can say that this version, admittedly, even though this is a DTM car, very, very different to a GT3, it feels somewhat more lively. I feel like I'm driving on the throttle a little bit more. It's somewhere in between AC and R Factor, you know? It's not quite as stilted as AC. It doesn't quite feel as mechanical, as robotic as ACC. There's a bit more play at the limit. It's inviting you to kind of just push the car just that little bit extra over the edge. I'm sure the lack of assists probably play into that. Parabolic or a corner, I have no idea on how to take, especially with as low camber as I've set here today. Extremely low camber. They say, hey, balance out the inner and the outer tire pressures within 5 to 8 degrees. Well, in order to do that at Monza, you're basically going to have cambers in the range of like 1 to 2, maybe? Alright, let's see if I can do this with assists. DRS ahoy. Here we go. Oh yeah, baby. Push the go fast button. I like this newfangled racing. Push button to overcome lack of skill. It's my kind of racing. Whoa. 3 wide? No. I'm not going to go 3 wide in there. Oh my god, it's so easy to lose the car on the throttle there. But so fun at the same time. Kind of using all my brain power just to drive this circuit that I barely know. Fortunately makes it difficult to communicate, but I'm going to use my push to pass and the DRS. Let me guess, I'm probably using the push to pass incorrectly. I'll probably have to use that when I'm like tapped out at top speed. But hey, here I am. This is how we roll here. Massive understeer due to camber and or bad driving. It's, you know what? This is surprisingly fun. Surprisingly fun. DTM, very cool class. I look forward to exploring it in the future in a sim that may or may not be this one. Come on, get on the power, rotate, no! Alright, I think I'm using the last batch of DRS we have. Sheldon Vanderlinde with the fastest lap, what a guy. What do we get? We get nothing. Nothing, exactly what we deserve. Though, actually, that was the best lap of this session, I think. Yeah, it was the only one in the low 140s, which I hear is actually quite bad for DTMs. I think I should be in the high 130s. But I'm going to work on that in the meanwhile. Guys, the fact that I'm able to drive a car like this with no assists is just remarkable. This force feedback engine is very, very impressive. Very lifelike, though I can see why some people might be upset about the lack of the front end feel. So the game used to signal that you were about to lock the front wheels based on, I suppose, the sponginess or the lightness of the wheel. You no longer really get that. You have to gauge it based on the car behavior, the motion of the camera, the sound effects, like hearing the tires start to screech, that's what's your indication, which, you know, admittedly is closer to real life. I don't mind that emission, or I wouldn't really call it an emission. I wouldn't really mind them aligning it that much more closer to real life, because that's ultimately what you're going to have to deal with anyway. There's still enough progressive room to drive a car like this on the limit. I mean, I didn't really lock the tires that badly in that run. I didn't spin out, at least too badly. I mean, quite impressed. Considering this is the upper end leg of the tour, I'm content to leave it there with the high downforce cars. Let's take a trip back through history and drive one of my favorite race cars of all time. So I may have left the best for last for myself. The BMW M1 Procar, one of my absolute favorite cars of all time in all motorsports history, and certainly one of the most infamous here at Daytona, USA. I mean, who wouldn't want a Lamborghini disguised as a BMW? I mean, look at that thing. Look at the size of those rear wheels. Look at the size of that massive cannon exhaust shooting right out of it. I mean, it's a monster. It is the DeLorean's wet dream. It's the Back to the Future car that never was. And here we go. Just barely found the right gear on time. Heading down towards T1. Always a hard, interesting braking zone because you have to turn while managing the car. Just barely, just barely. Let's pretend I've driven manual before. I'm here, of course, with the oval wheel rim. Got to make the most of this. Whoop. Such aggressive braking from the AI. Now there's tons of understeer on this car. Got to be very careful on the throttle, because that ton of understeer can be followed by a massive wave of oversteer as you get on the power. But listen to the sound of that thing. Listen to the judder as I change gears. Listen to the vibe. I mean, this, wow. Okay, this is RaceRoom at its best. The American line. Just the sound of this manic, what is it, a V10? V10, V12, something crazy. It's the kind of thing the Lamborghini were doing back then and probably is still doing to this day. Almost sounds like my indicator stalk's going off, but I think that's the sound of pickup or gravel. Maybe gravel in the wheel wells, bouncing around in there as I get into toe land, slamming in the gears. Oh, that judder when you change gears is so good. I don't know if that's happening because I'm letting the clutch out too fast, but whatever, it's fun, it's vibey. I'm gonna keep doing it. So early on the brakes here, gotta be so careful. As I get into a traffic jam, it seems, going to the bus stop. Oh, this is what I wanted. None of this crazy bouncing through the bus stop. It actually feels like an automobile. Ever since I first drove this thing in AMS2, I've fallen in love with the car, but to actually drive this rendering of it, to drive this version of it is a different experience entirely. It finally makes sense. It finally feels like a car. As they bounce around, actually, I've got to say they seem to have done quite well on the tire deformation, on the altering of the contact patch. Oh my god, it's so hard to maintain the braking while heel and toeing and turning at the same time. Props to the guys who did this back in the day. Not sure this car ever drove at Daytona, USA though, but I feel like it probably never really left Europe. But then again, someone's gonna prove me wrong. Someone's gonna show me this thing doing Road America or something. Laguna Seca. All the insane things. Man, you can really feel the car loading up on the fronts when you're heavily under the brakes. You can just feel the sponging of the front tires. And the grip loss in the rear is so progressive. Does that guy's car say denim? It does. Wow, that is very 80s. I love it. Come on, rotate the rear on the power. That's it. That's what you want. That's the experience you want. So progressive. If I had to compare this force feedback to something, I would compare it to the original Assetto Corsa when it comes to oval rim cars like this. But in a way that's even more progressive, has more resolution, because obviously the physics model of RaceRoom has continued to develop over that time. While AC's been out of development for a little while now, it's almost like where we would be had they continued to develop on AC. And I love it. I absolutely love it. Okay, there's a car on the inside apparently. So I don't know if there is a proximity indicator option in the options. maybe I'm missing something, maybe there's a radar you can pull up. If there is, I don't know about it, and I could really use it when racing close like this, because I have no idea if there we go. Now I know there's someone to the right side of me. The boss. As we come up to the finish line for the last time in all of our tests, hope you guys have enjoyed the run through as much as I have. The new force feedback engine, and She's good? I thought there was a crash happening for a sec there. Great. The new force feedback engine, and I'm hesitant to use this terminology, but it is a revolution for RaceRoom. I first drove in this title about 3 or 4 nights ago. I drove this car specifically at the RaceRoom test track. It was junk compared to this. It just felt unengaging. It felt weird. What is that car doing? I don't know if you guys can see that, but that's quite something. The car felt nothing like this because the physical forces weren't being translated to me in the column. Now I can keep it in the sweet spot. I can dance with it. I can have fun. I can feel the flex. I can feel the contact patch expanding, the gyroscopic forces. All the buzzwords the guys were using to sell this to you, they all seem to have been true. If you're a RaceRoom player, if you haven't booted it up in a few months or a few years, this is your chance to try it. And I'm so glad I jumped on this train right now. Anyway, let's jump to our conclusion, our recap. So, it's safe to say that this update impressed me a lot more than I thought it would. I didn't expect some of the car and track experiences to be among my favorite in all of sim racing. This became especially clear when I tried the BMW DTM car against R-Factor's new offering. Though R-Factor had by far the more detailed track model, the DTM car in RaceRoom felt far more planted and grounded like a car of its profile and level of downforce presumably would. The forces being translated to me via the force feedback engine were more useful and less noisy than that of R-Factor, a sim long renowned in the industry as being the king of force feedback. I was in a mild shock, to be honest. There is so much more content for me to review in this very impressive simulator before I can cast anything resembling a final judgment, but so far I can say that I'm very optimistic based on what I've experienced. There is no contest between the new force feedback engine and the old. Driving on a FANATEC DD1, I can assure you the new one is leagues more lifelike and loads up with forces that more closely communicate the depth of the surprisingly capable physics engine in the sim. Their UI, as far as I'm concerned, is industry leading. Setting up FOV, FFB, and the car itself is an absolute joy with the readouts they provide for you. All sim racing developers can take a cue or two from Sector 3 here. I can't wait to drive more in RaceRoom, find new and exciting combinations, and keep sharing that experience with you guys. Make sure to subscribe for more RaceRoom and other sim racing content, and until the next fun excursion, I'll see you later.